for joining us.
Morning.
So, before we dive into the topic of how AI is going to affect the future writing, I kind of wanted to level set for us in the audience. We're talking about two AI-powered technologies in general, natural language processing and natural language generation. And Chris, I was wondering if you might give us just a quick overview of what those technologies are and why marketers need to pay attention to them.
So, okay, natural language processing is when you're taking language and trying to teach machines to recognize it, to deconstruct it, understand how language works. Generation then takes that learning and turns it into, let's make new language. The underlying technology for all of this is something relatively new called a transformer. Not the 80s toy, which I love, but it's the ability for machines to look kind of like a spotlight at blobs of tokens, text, any kind of input, and then say, okay, what have I learned? And then what is likely to come next? And those transformers are what has revolutionized and made possible everything we're seeing. When you go, Lisa and I were talking last night, Persado has this in the technology, MarketMuse has this in the technology. Everybody who is doing up-to-date language generation and language processing is using transformers.
Very cool. Okay, so we have machines that are essentially trying to predict what language comes next. And Jeff, I know that you have quite a bit of experience with what we would call like large language models. Can you maybe walk us through what a large language model is, why it's important, and kind of what they're capable of today? Because in the last couple of years, these have really taken off in terms of their capabilities and their advancement.
Yeah, it's striking. I mean, you look at progression in technology in any other field, but when you're looking at something like natural language processing and generation, it's exponential every 6 months. If you wrote something about this, a couple months ago, it's out of date. New language models, whether they're publicly accessible or whether they're not, are growing in size at alarming rates, and to the average marketer, it doesn't necessarily mean much. It's just that they're being trained on different data sets. They're going to be quicker, more likely able to be tuned and specifically trained to support a particular use case that you might have. And what Chris has said, one thing to note is predicting the next word. What a natural language generation or a language model is trying to do is, based on being trained on a big set of data, is trying to predict that next word. That's really different. There's actually some research from Meta, or Facebook, whatever you want to call them, that talks about how that's different than the way that we think. So they've studied the human brain, and the human brain predicts multiple steps ahead, kind of like we're playing a chess player, right? You are kind of thinking about all the possibilities that might happen in this particular language. Where we are now is extremely large language models that can be trained on any data sets. The first ones were trained on the popular ones, like we're trained on Wikipedia or large data repositories like that. You're going to be able to train them on a lot of different things and have them work really, really well to be refined. But they're still only predicting right now just one step ahead, but it can still produce amazing results. So these large ones, you'll see Google's, they all have really humorously weird names. And I have 5.6 trillion. I've got 7.7 trillion. You're going to start to continue to see that. What does that mean for you? It means that when those become release ready and available to be used, you might be able to train them to do something really useful for your business more quickly. That's what we're already starting to see.
One of the things I think is really interesting is that transformers have no memory. Right? That's the critical flaw they have. Google is working on a memory structure because as humans, we remember what we wrote. But when you talk to some of these AI chatbots, they're like, "Hi, my name is Chris," and then four lines later, it's like, "By the way, Bob," I'm like, "No, you have no memory." But they're working on creating like little scratch pads for them to take notes as they talk to you, so that they remember key pieces of information.
And that's one of the innovations that we had put together in our generation platform, which is completely separate from GPT, is to have a mid to long-term memory. And that allows us to write. I love the word storytelling, and that's because it allows us to write something that understands how the story started. Whereas, publicly available natural language generation solutions, they don't know, they don't remember what, was A for breakfast this morning. So that's basically the situation.
Yeah, that's a really good. I'm
I was
sorry.
thinking we're doing something very similar. We're not telling stories, but we're with a technology that's creating language for different touch points. And it needs to know the touch point ahead if it's going to make language for another touch point thinking about like maybe a headline and then the next line of the email.
That's a great point. And I think it's really interesting you mentioned the lack of memory point. Anyone in here who's used any AI, some AI writing tools, sometimes people get frustrated because it starts writing the same thing over repeating itself. So that kind of context, we're really seeing some interesting developments in how quickly those tools are getting better and better.
They're getting strikingly better. If you ever use some of the early versions, GPT-2 even, they degrade as well. So they fall apart. You can watch them die in front of you. It's like, I was going to the store, dog. And so basically you can watch those things happen. It doesn't happen anymore. It might degrade into something that's readable. So you're like, this is written, a human could have written this. But it's not providing any substance, but it's actually text that could pass, theoretically, as being written by a human, but it's a human who's just kind of writing words that make sense. So that's where we've evolved already in 2 years.
And I'll disagree with you, Lisa. So Persado does create stories. What you're doing is you're creating prompts. Your subject lines are the prompts for the reader.
Yeah, exactly.
That actually leads into what I wanted to ask you, Lisa. So as head of content intelligence at Persado, maybe make this like a real use case where it's like, how are you guys using language AI? How are your customers using it? What does that look like in the real world?
So the Persado platform is a motivation AI. And what it's trying to do is motivate the person reading the message to take the action. So you as a brand are sending messages, maybe you want someone to buy shoes, but instead of tapping into their wants, instead you're changing that and you're just tapping into motivating them to take the action, to open the email or the text message, to click on the link, to put it in their cart. And so Persado is tuning the language that you need to do that. And the main motivator that over the 10 years Persado has been measuring responses has been emotions. So what we're seeing is that when you step away from the want and you just think about motivating the action, you really want to tap into lots of different emotions that generate people saying, yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm going to click the button. I'm interested. And it works across industries. It doesn't have to be buying shoes. It can be in financial services. It can be in healthcare. It can be in telecom. It can be in education. It can really be anywhere that you're looking to motivate people to take actions.
Awesome. Kind of along those lines, that seems like you've been with 10 plus years at this point, and I assume the platform has just grown better and better over time. Jeff, you had mentioned in the last couple of years, a lot of language models have really improved. Could you give us a sense? Because I know a lot of people in the room have at times dabbled with AI writing tools, and honestly, if you last dabbled with a tool a year plus ago, you might want to dabble again because they're getting very, very good very quick. What has changed in the last couple of years to improve this technology?
Technology, it sounds sort of vague for me to say that, but how much can be a transformer at the large size of the technology, the cloud computing capabilities, and then you're learning how to train these things. One of the arts of this is tuning these models. Being able to take a general language model and make it for a specific task. That's something that's become a lot more easy and more simple. And that's something that's going to become more commercially appropriate for a lot of folks. So, you can train it on Wikipedia and then tune it for all of the content you've ever written. So it kind of writes a little bit more like you. That's interesting, right? So you're going to see a lot of those types of changes. The memory side, you see, trying to compare how humans think with those models, which is some of the stuff that I mentioned I forget the name of the company, NeuroLab or NeuroLink. You can check out that with Meta. And I think it all goes along to produce something that's able to be used commercially, to give somebody an inspiration or to inspire change. A good story. It isn't just a chronological series of events. That's an anecdote. But if you're starting to write content that actually inspires change and walk, that's where the buck's going.
Yeah, it's, I think, really interesting to see how many, we're talking obviously at a high level about NLG, NLP, and kind of language models, but there's so many different use cases for this technology. And Chris, I'd love to get your take. What are some of the top kind of marketing use cases you're seeing for AI writing tools, natural language generation processing?
Obviously, everyone and their cousin is cranking out mediocre blog content at scale, which is fine. I mean, it's better than having the intern who showed up drunk, trying to bang out a blog post. You do scale much faster with these tools, and there's this interesting concept of the bar of competency, right? So 4 years ago, machines were basically cranking out word salad, right? It made no sense. It was basically unusable before the transformer models. Now they're cranking out mediocre content, right? Unsupervised mediocre content. You get, okay. With some of the latest changes in architecture, you're going to see that go to good within the next year or two. So one of the big changes that's happening right now with transformers is the fact that these language models, you're mentioning like GPTs, the Eulithra AI, NeoX models, like 20 billion parameters. After a certain point, think of these models as basically just big pieces of software. And if anyone who's ever installed Microsoft Word over the years, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. At a certain point, it just occupies your entire computer. What happened last year was that some of the bigger companies, Google in particular, has devised this thing called system of experts, where we're now taking this big model, shattering it into many, many pieces, and having little pieces run in a distributed cloud computing environment. That means that they're faster. You can train them much, much faster. And for the average small business or the AI native companies, they'll be able to build on these models and get them up to speed a whole lot faster. What's going to be really interesting is what Google announced 2 years ago, but also a lot of other companies are doing, which is called multimodal modeling. Google addressed this thing called multitask unified model, MUM, that is rolling out to search. If you type in, hiking Mount Fuji, as it understands the different tokens that go into the system, like hiking boots and trails and photos and videos and YouTube, it's going to say, here are all the search results of any type that match. When you look at Google's ad system, the Performance Max system says, here's every channel I have available, which, thank you, Google, we've given you like 80% of our lives. Here's all the things I know. Here's all the places I can put your ads. So advertising itself is going to be more interesting based on the language we're putting in. But where it's going to get real interesting in the next 2 years is in the way we use these language-based models. Paul showed DALL-E too, which is a kind of a cool, neat, fun introduction. Put words in, get a picture out. Right? The reverse is also possible. Here's a photo, write a news story about it. Right? So for like a small town newspaper or a corporate blog, someone takes a photo of this panel and puts it back into a transformer-based model. It may be able to narrate some of this. Where it gets real crazy is when you start saying, let's forget about just language itself and say, what can language unlock? The transformer model doesn't care what tokens you put into it. So there are experiments being done now saying, here's some words of a story I want to tell, create a chemical formula. Here's some words, write code. Here's some words, make a vaccine for this kind of virus. Because, it doesn't care. It has to be trained on these things. Which means that our ability for basically to get solutions much faster for all kinds of problems is going to radically accelerate. And if you're not AI native or AI emergent, you are toast. Like you just hang up, update your LinkedIn profile and move on because your company is screwed.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think it's worth pausing for a second, just kind of really reiterating to the audience, like Jeff mentioned 4 years ago, stuff wasn't great, or Chris mentioned rather, 4 years ago, certain writing technologies that used AI were not great, so to speak. Yet within the last year, we're getting to okay and good. And in the next year or three, we're talking about literally telling the machine, write me some code, create a vaccine, solve a problem, just with natural language. So I really think it's worth pausing on that and understanding how quickly this is evolving. And you don't need to know the ins and outs of transformer models. You need to understand that there are hundreds, or if not thousands, of companies that are building on top of these.
You land on some of the early natural language generation work. There was a good reason why they were doing it. You know, in Washington Post, for example, heliograph, which was one of the earliest implementations of sort of NLG, was a lot of training templates, but it had a goal, right? We want to cover every Olympic event fairly. That's cool. We want to cover every local, state, and federal election properly. We want to have some coverage. That's the bar. Right? Now, you may not be able to get to all the content that you want to create for your business. Well, there's a way to at least get to it at the bar right now, right? And to be okay. And it also what it did was really, it has already crushed the market for low quality content. There's no reason to pay someone to write bad content right now, because you can get a robot to write really bad content. And so that's really good for someone who's in the business of high quality content and has been for 25 years. But that all goes into, we have a great reason. We want to analyze all of our sales calls to try to understand them more and understand the words that are being said, the topics that are being covered, where in the buyer journey our average prospect is. You know? So if you can come up with those use cases, a lot more of them can be solved. If text exists within your business, there's probably a solve for that. So talking to people here can get you there. So think about all the places you have manual tasks and text being produced. And there's probably a way that you can become AI emergent just by having this artifacts in your organization.
And the system of experts model is going to change things for a lot of marketers, because if you think about it, the pile, which is Yolithra's language training set, is 800 million documents, right? How many blog posts are on your corporate blog? Maybe 1,000, maybe, if you're really hyper prolific, maybe 10,000. That's a tiny little drop. And right now the fine tuning is still not quite there. It's much better than it used to be, but it's still not as good as you writing it yourself. But once you have a system of experts model where you can take, because it can deal with sparsity, meaning like not very much data, much better, your ability to create stuff that sounds like you will be dramatically better.
That's where most of our innovations been in this is that topic expert model. It's really striking. It doesn't necessarily produce a great story, but it's interesting when you can see your own kind of proclivities in the text that's generated.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think what also is striking is like, you don't have to necessarily be deep into computer science, machine learning, what have you, on the technical side to be using these technologies as a marketer. And everyone up here is a very serious technical expert. I think, Lisa, your background is really interesting to kind of show the audience, like, you know, you're not starting, you studied and also work in linguistics. And that leads you to be head of content intelligence at Versado. I think it's a really fascinating journey. Maybe you could connect the dots for us how that worked out.
Sure. So I was a kid who really liked names, which is a weird thing to be obsessed with as a child. But I thought they were cool, like where they came from, like organized names, and that got me interested in language. And so I went to school and I studied linguistics. And I thought it would be really interesting while getting this degree to specialize in onomastics, which is trivia you don't need to know, but is the study of names. Because I was not looking for a job. I was the type of millennial who was like, I'll get an expertise in something weird. But this took me to a technology company that had a predictive software product based around names. And so I was hired onto this team right out of school as an expert in names. And what I brought to that company was a lot of linguistic methods and processes that I had learned, brought linguistics into their product, and what I took away from this company was how to build a product and predictive products in general. And so kind of grew up at this company, became a product designer and a product director. And when I was looking for the next step in my career, I found Versado, and I was really excited about Versado's technology because it was finally taking me beyond names and really into language and generating language and measuring the effects of language and seeing how all of this came together. So content intelligence is a specialty that most companies don't have, but my team sits at the intersection of data science, machine learning, AI, and product. And what we do is we kind of bring the human intuition to talk to the machines and try to understand what the machines are learning and communicate that back to the humans. And all of that sort of sits at the nucleus of the product organization. So I tell people, my team are the language experts, we're the humans who work with the machines.
That's awesome. I love that point to like the idea of intersection. I think for probably many people here who are just getting started with AI, whether for language or something else, it's easy to kind of think of AI as a little technical, futuristic. Like as a marketer, I don't have a super technical background. Do I need to be hiring engineers? Do I need to go get a machine learning degree? And those things might be valid at some point, but your career path is something that, 20 years ago would not even exist, right? I think a lot of people have very interesting career paths related to AI. As a marketer, 5 years from now, there are going to be jobs in marketing that we do not have today. You're going to have things like chief algorithm officers, people training algorithms and language models, the human in the machine. I mean, these are real career paths and real skill sets that are going to be developed in the industry in the next 5 to 10 years.
And when you talk about, whether these types of language AIs are taking jobs or creating jobs, that's the creating jobs side. Look at all these career paths so you get to work with these machines, and I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, that is exactly what is on my mind, and I think probably on other people's minds is like, we talked about how crazy some of the applications are here on applications are developing. I kind of want to get a sense from the panel, how do you think this is going to impact careers, jobs, and our kind of our work as marketers?
I mean, I think that it's going to create jobs because I'm a human who got a job created by the invention of all of this. So to me, I feel like there's just a huge opportunity when you can give creative input to a machine and it can take from you and do something you never would have thought of, but you can also take back from it and do things that you didn't know. And this happens in the writing space, and it happens for us. I wouldn't have said before I started working at Versado that if I just change the emotion, I'm going to get a better response. The machines figured that out because of the way we were doing over 10 years of multivariate testing and learning what works for different customers in different situations. But then I can take that back and write more creative types of copy than I ever would have. I have inspiration to go in another direction. And then all of that can be tested and then fed back as data to train newer models. So I see it as a partnership.
Yeah, that's a great point because, we read a lot about automation and AI's effect on employment, and there's a lot of valid commentary on that, but it's not always as simple as, AI is going to take your job. I mean, it really is humans working with machines, it seems like. So, Jeff, is that kind of your experience that you've seen? Or?
Yeah, I think it's the jobs are the people that care about how you got there on these things. You can look at multivariate. I've been doing A/B multivariate testing for a very, very long time. And the first time I did a large scale one was on email. It landed on, we need HTML in that email and a red button. The people that care about how you got there, that matter, right? And so there's going to be a lot of jobs there. I think that most of the companies that transition go from subjective perspectives, right? And you go to manual labor, and you go to rules, ifs and thens, and then you go to predictive outcomes. You're somewhere in that journey with every task, right? So it's the journey of going from if-thens to predictive, wanting to be able to predict the outcomes on the content that you produce that is going to be successful, or the landing pages that you produce. Wanting to predict the outcomes and that manifest in the form of leads or sales or organic search traffic, as in what marketing does to predict outcomes for organic search. Your team needs to want to go from manual labor to rules or jump straight from manual labor to predictive with every task that exists. And that's the jobs. Those are the jobs.
Yeah, and that point is really interesting about, it's not necessarily you're going to be the suddenly made obsolete. You do need to want to actually do change, and it's very possible. But Chris, you were kind of talking about what happens if you don't. Some of these companies who are screwed. Can maybe talk a little bit more about how people need to change?
Do you want the good news or the bad news? Okay, so there's fundamentally two types of companies, right? There are regressive companies and progressive companies. A regressive company is going to look at AI and say, this is a cost-saving tool. If we have 10 people on staff that all perform the same job and we can automate 40% of those jobs, we can remove 4 people. We can remove 4 parts of overhead and preserve the remaining 6, right? That's a regressive company, and AI will be used absolutely to cost people their jobs because you just want to maximize your profits, and that's it. Progressive companies will look at those people and say, okay, well, we've got 10 people, we can automate away 40% of the drudgery. What else can we train those people to do? What else can we have them upskill on? Can they become better creators? Can they become novel creators? Can they, like Prasado does, can they be people who supervise the outputs? Sort of, AI is essentially transforms you from like first violin to the conductor of the orchestra, right? And now you're supervising the orchestra. At progressive companies, you're going to see people say, okay, we're going to upskill everybody to learn how to work the machines. Maybe you're going to say, instead of I'm writing blog posts, now I'm going to supervise the outputs. I'm going to give feedback to the machine and say, no, this one is clearly not right, or this one's okay, but this is how I would tweak it, and training machinery. The challenge is, a pretty good bet as to what kind of company you've got is how quarterly earnings impact the company, right? If you're privately held, if you don't really, you only answer to a few shareholders, and if they've got a mindset of growth over measured in years, that's probably a company that's going to be willing to invest in its people and say, yeah, you may not have as much work to do today, but we're going to find new stuff to upskill you. If, on the other hand, your company is enslaved to the quarter and say, we've got to hit these numbers or else, you're probably going to be looking at a company that uses AI to take away as many jobs as possible, to run as lean as possible so that they can maximize shareholder value.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, even in our own work at Marketing AI Institute, we're using some AI tools to generate content, in some contexts to inform content strategy. We've really been lucky in the sense we found, someone asked me yesterday to estimate, like, how much efficiency do you think you gain from that? And say, 30, 40% faster content creation, development, makes my job a lot easier. That time is reinvested into things like, I'm going to go invest a couple hours in reading an in-depth research report to make the content better, go interview someone. So it's not that content is doing my job, it's allowing me to do the things I'm more uniquely good at than just kind of cranking out, post after post.
So stealing Chris's analogy when making the violin, in case someone who's never played and you can crank out a song, right? But it doesn't teach them how to play it. And in writing, that's the situation. You can go from nothing to a piece of content. It doesn't make you a good writer. You're not a good journalist, you're not a good storyteller, right? And your content's not exhibiting that. So it's the people that still want to learn music theory who are going to excel and want to predict their outcomes. And that's really the difference maker with most people who are pragmatically winning in marketing technology implementation.
So as we're kind of thinking as marketers about how to get more comfortable with language AI, to use these tools more, Jeff, what kind of considerations should we be thinking of? Because obviously, Chris was mentioning the memory problem. There's obviously issues with bias in models and data sets. What should a marketer be seriously thinking about as they're adopting these tools?
Treating outputs that are generation, right? Talking about treating those outputs as if you were it was an outsourced writing professional whom you've never met before, and treat them as such. You can think about them in that way and have a lot of success. Treat it as inspiration for something. Don't set the bar so low that you're willing to publish something that's so far. Teams that are doing that are having super bad outcomes. And it's because all the content on your site it tells the story of expertise through your business. And if a chunk of your site is kind of low quality content, it's actually impacting your high quality stuff. So I've heard many people, something to consider is if you've got people internally or someone saying, it's kind of like, oh, we give our low quality content, the content we don't really care about, to the agency or to the AI, right? and you know, if that's happening, you know, stop the bus, because it's actually hurting you on the down. So those are considerations. It's, you don't want to get to the point where content is not valued within your organization.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening with a lot of teams. So they're thinking it's all about the payload,
Right.
But it's not, it's about the package.
Interesting. Yeah, and I assume that probably has some implications too if you're in a more highly regulated industry. You know, there's probably some legal exposure around certain facts or misinformation maybe that a model is writing.
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, you know, Google's trying to self-regulate this with what they call your money or your life. You probably heard YMYL. If your content influences people's well-being or not, it's treated as a different layer of expectations. It kind of gets to what Chris was talking about with the multimodal and the power that you have to be able to analyze search results. It's something that we do, is really analyze how it's being processed. Google putting in a word and getting back a buyer journey effectively in a model. A lot of these search results are basically like everything you ever want to know, and what's that journey in that process. But yeah, if you're in a regulated industry and the content on your site is telling someone how to, you know, at what rate they should adhere to their medication, you've got a problem. It's a big problem. It's happening right now.
Yeah, it seems like maybe a pervasive problem sometimes.
Well, in regulated farm is a great example. We work with a lot of farm companies that have unbranded sites and branded sites. If those two things overlap, they don't stay companies anymore. Right? So if you've got a company and you've got a website about, you know, a particular ailment or disease, it's not allowed to mention the actual brand. That branded site has to live over here. And they don't link to one another. There's some crazy regulatory requirements that if you don't stick to them, you don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
One of the things that we talk about when we're training these models is how much is the model hallucinating, which is when the model thinks up its own things that weren't in the source material and could write something else. But it's not just how much is it hallucinating, it's what's the risk of the hallucination. And when you're in a regulated industry, there's really high risk. And a lot can go wrong when models start hallucinating when they create content. But in other places, sometimes, you know, maybe in retail, there's high risk and low risk. And if the model tells you that it's not 20% off, it's 70% off, like that's high risk to that business. But if the model changes from, you know, beautiful to chic when describing a bag, that's low risk. So we talk about a lot about the risk of the hallucination.
Interesting. And yeah, I know Prasad works with, you know, quite a few regulated industries as well. You know, just to kind of make things tangible, do you have kind of a case study or an example of how one of your customers is kind of using language AI?
Yeah, and maybe I'll go to a regulated industry.
There we go.
So we've been working recently with Ally Bank, which is financial services, and they've been doing a lot of marketing and a lot of acquisition marketing. And they came to Versado because they wanted help with cross-sell marketing. They wanted to get more value out of their existing customers, and so we started running a lot of these multivariate tests with them and training our models to, you know, understand what their customers were responding to. And they had a lot of language around encouragement. They were trying to encourage people to, you know, sign up for another service that they offered. Versado was able to recognize that what was working better were different emotions. So excitement and achievement were much stronger performers for them, making people feel rewarded or just like kind of like hyping a little bit some of these. And that was a bit counterintuitive, but it worked really well, and they were able to see, I think, on average 25% uplift against their original message from the message that Versado's technology wrote, and sometimes even higher. And it was really able to bring a lot of value to their business by making their customers more valuable to them.
Wow. Yeah, that's really cool. I love the counterintuitive example because sometimes, like you said, the machines are teaching us.
Yeah.
You know, in the final few minutes here, I wanted to get kind of panelists' take on, if I'm a marketer in this room, what advice would you have for me in terms of either getting started or expanding my use of language AI? Chris, I know you do a lot of deployments and helping people get started with sophisticated AI solutions. Like, what advice would you have for a marketer getting started with these tools?
To have a purpose, have a goal, right? Because AI and machine learning inherently means taking lots of data and teaching a machine to learn from it. If you don't have lots of data, you don't have an AI problem. Right? You don't have a problem that an AI would be good at solving. That's really important. And the other thing to keep in mind is that all of ad tech and search engine optimization is about to radically change in the next year or so. The two insurance policies you have against other people's AIs handicapping your business are, one, your brand. Right? If you're not building brand, you've missed the boat. The boat's gone. Right? And it is critical because that is how Google's AI judges things like authority, right? Is the presence and strength of your brand. That's number one. And number two is your community, right? So you have a Slack or a Discord or some kind of discussion forum, something that allows you to stay in direct touch with people, because that also helps you circumvent algorithms. If you are looking at Instagram or Facebook or TikTok or whatever, you are having your message intermediated by somebody else's AI, right? And you have no control over it. You have no control over their model. You have no control over what is shown. When you are talking directly to people, even something like an email mailing list, you are escaping the ability for an AI to intermediate your customers away from you. So those two things kind of sit at the opposite ends of your customer journey, and they are absolutely essential. If you do not have them, put AI aside for a second and fix that first.
It's a really good point, and something we probably don't talk about as much as we should is that it's not only a competitive advantage to be using AI in the right way, it's also some of your competitive advantage is circumventing.
Absolutely, because you don't have control over other people's AI, and everyone who's done search engine optimization for more than a hot minute knows that if Google pivots on you, you're hosed. I worked at a company in 2006 that made 80% of its revenue from search, and one day we got bumped from listing 1 to listing 2. We lost 70% of our revenue, like that. And we have no control over it, right? Everything, look at the marketing channels in your mix that are intermediated by a machine, and look at the ones that you have a direct connection to your customer with. The direct connection customer channels, make sure you keep investing in them, right? Do not let other people's AIs run all over you, because it is not going to be pretty.
That's a really good point. And Lisa, how would you suggest kind of marketers approach this? What advice would you have for them?
I think my advice would be to consider the use case that you want for your AI technologies, and make sure a couple things. Make sure that the stakeholders are aligned on what it's trying to do. I see a lot of issues where AI is going to solve all the problems, so we're going to pay for it and it will solve all of our problems. But today's top use cases for AI are pretty specialized. So if you have a specialized use case that you're investing in, make sure that the people who are making the investment and controlling the money behind it, like they get it, they know what it's going to do for them, and that's what they want it to do. And I think it's going to be a lot more successful that way.
That's great advice. I mean, some of this is just change management and managing the expectations of leadership versus getting better with AI sometimes. I want to give you all such a big thank you for coming up here. Can we get a hand for our so a quick note, we're going to do breakout sessions